Hola mi familia, ¿qué tal? I know it's been a bit of a wait since my last upload, but first I wanted to thank you all for the love and support for my Moon Knight videos. It means a lot. I still plan on making more content for the Fist of Khonshu, so don't worry. But for now...
Where do the dead belong?
You let Wanda down!
In the world of the living.
No!
For this newest spawn,
Let us all down!
moments of peace never come. His memories are fragments of the life he once had.
You came back for her, Spawn. You came back for Wanda.
Wanda.
She's got a life now. She's got a child you couldn't give her, and a husband who's still wearing his face. What do you got? What do you got?
I'm a hell spawn.
Let's get into it. Across the medium of comics and throughout my history of reading them, there is no character that I've been more loyal to. I would describe him as comics' most edgy and brooding character. And I'm not talking about Batman. Remember, Nightwing Stan channel. And no, I don't mean the Punisher. Man, Warzone was a classic. R.I.P. to Ray Stevenson. I'm talking about Todd McFarlane's creation, Spawn. Spawn was first created in 1992 after Todd McFarlane left Marvel Comics with other artists in the industry to form Image Comics. To summarize, Image would act as the third powerhouse in the industry dominated by Marvel and DC Comics, but the difference, Image would allow creators to own the rights to their characters. And what is Image Comics' longest running and most popular series? The crown and title go to Spawn. But like Marvel's Moon Knight, I would describe Spawn as something of a niche comic book character. He's experienced different ebbs and flows of popularity throughout the years, the height of which was reached in the 90s after the 97 motion picture and the glorious, and I mean just spectacular, Emmy Award-winning animated series produced by HBO. But before we go in depth of the character, I just want to kind of tell you guys how I discovered the character. So if you guys have heard me mention in previous videos, the love for this character first and foremost starts with my dad. Now my dad isn't exactly a big Spawn fan, but I wouldn't even know about the character if it weren't for him. My earliest memories of the character, I believe, were when I went with my parents. I was really little to see the movie in the theaters. Now I love me some Michael Jai White, who played the character in the movie, but the movie was I don't even remember what I actually thought of it when I was that young, but I do remember thinking this was the coolest character I have ever seen, in my opinion. And I will say again, my opinion. I lied, Spawn has the best design in all of American comics. This is not up for debate. For as long as I can remember, that black, white, and red color scheme just fit so well. The spikes, the chains, the menacing green eyes, and yes, that cape. Doctor Strange could never. And I'm so serious about that. Argue with your mother, no one in comics has a better cape than Spawn. Now, many of you might remember the HBO animated series. That animated series for its time was just a work of art, and I actually think it still holds up to this day. The way Spawn was always bathed in the shadows made the moments where you got to see him in full color, bathed in the light, just felt like such a treat. And who would I be to not mention the immaculate and talented Keith David for providing the voice for the titular character?
I tell you, I just adore doing Spawn. I would do it again anytime.
The animated series told an extremely dark and mature story that at the time I was not allowed to watch. In second grade, I got a Spawn comic from a friend in school and I tried to sneak it home, and I remember it to this day. It was issue 44 and that cover was so edgy. I keep using that word, but that's just what it was in the 90s and the early 2000s. And somehow my dad found out that I had it. He saw it underneath my bed and he made me give it back. But once I was around 13, he didn't care and he let me start getting the book. Then I bought Spawn Volume 1, which collected issues 1 through 12 minus issue 10. And I was hooked, to say the least. Venom co-creator and Spider-Man all-star artist Todd McFarlane really went off the rails and was unhinged in this really visceral and dynamic art style. Now, I want to take a different approach to the many Spawn videos that are out there. I really want people to understand this character, who he is, what his motives are. Many people just see a character that just looks cool, he's really powerful, he's got a dope cape, and a lot of people don't understand what the character is. So let's start from the beginning.
I want my humanity back.
To keep it simple, spawns are undead warriors chosen to lead Hell's vast armies in a war against heaven. These spawns are judged and chosen by the demon known as Malboja. Malboja was one of the most powerful demon lords in Hell, and he reigned unchallenged in Hell's 8th circle. After meeting a certain criteria and judged by Malboja, a spawn is given a symbiote that they are permanently bonded to. They are given a vast array of abilities that we'll cover later on in the video. But for now, we'll be focusing on the main spawn, Al Simmons. So the story of Spawn follows deceased United States Marine Lieutenant Colonel Al Simmons. But Al's story and ultimate transformation into Spawn starts with that of a Sergeant Francis Charles Parker. He would be a part of the 10th Cavalry, one of which his regiment was known as the Buffalo Soldiers. Francis would set himself apart by having a very distinguished service, until he and his men were posted at Fort Concho, a town near St. Angelo, Texas. And that colored regiment would face a lot of racism at that time, but they managed to get by. But unfortunately, one of Francis's own men was gunned down in a racially motivated murder. Violence would then break out between his soldiers and the townspeople. After the incident, Francis would flee the town, but he would ultimately be labeled as a fugitive and a deserter. His only goal, however, was to make it back to Colorado to see his fiancée, Alma. Struggling to survive in the snow, Francis would come upon a man in white. But this man was seemingly invisible to all around him but Francis. The man would ride away, compelling Francis to follow him. There, Francis was led to a cabin where he saw the bodies of a woman and children gunned down. Francis was then spotted and arrested. Held in jail in the city of Bain, Francis would meet his fellow inmate named Job. And Job was in incarceration, being framed for the murder of his wife and children, the bodies that Francis had discovered. Job himself knows who committed the murders, and he swears vengeance upon the man and his gang who are being protected by the city. Late into the night hours, Francis and Job are then visited by the man in white, and he would ask them what they are willing to give in exchange for their freedom. Job says he's willing to give anything in exchange for vengeance upon those who let his wife and children die. Francis, however, would decline. The man in white was intrigued by both Job's thirst for vengeance and for Francis's strength of resolve to remain a man. He would disappear, but would return the next morning when Francis and Job were sentenced to be lynched. The man in white would utilize some strange magic into manipulating the townsfolk into freeing the two men before they were killed. However, he was both early enough to save Francis, yet late enough to allow Job to be killed. He would then revive Job and granting him the powers necessary to kill every single person in that town. Job would ultimately become the first gunslinger spawn. However, not only was he charged with killing the people who had murdered his family, he would have to kill every single soul in the town of Bain, down to the last woman and child. Francis would only survive, however, in part due to the man in white telling Job that Francis must live. After the massacre, Francis was spirited out of the town, and of course, the man in white is there to meet him. He tells Francis that through him there will be born a spawn that will help him set the world aflame and to rule next to him over its ashes. Upon leaving, Francis would change his name from a piece of parchment paper that he finds to Henry Thomas Simmons. He would return to Colorado, find Alma, and ultimately marry her. And in his last quiet days, he would leave a journal documenting his life and a warning to all of his descendants about the man in white.
I never saw the man in white again. But now my wife is expecting our firstborn, and a terrible dread has descended upon me. I write this for you, my children, for my grandchildren, for all my generations to come. I know one day he will return to make the offer I refused. This is my warning. You must turn your back on him. To accept his pact is worse than death. The promise he makes you may taste sweet on your tongue, but the bitter aftertaste will last for eternity.
Al Simmons would ultimately come from the line of Henry and Alma. Al grew up a conflicted young man, the middle child of 3. He was emotionally distant from his father Bernard, who spent a lot of time away from home as a traveling salesman, and he was relatively close with his 2 brothers, Mark and Richard. His relationship with his mother, however, was complicated to say the least. She was secretly a practitioner of satanic arts and maintained a rather ambiguous relationship with a man named Mr. Malefic. It is later revealed that Mr. Malefic is a fallen angel named Mammon. He manipulated a young Esther into marrying Bernard, as he knew that their union would bring about the birth of the strongest hellspawn to ever exist. Al displayed a tendency for violence at a young age. He was far more aggressive than his 2 brothers, a trait that Mr. Malefic took notice of. He began to subject Al to various experiments to test his capacity for pain and death, even going so far as introducing Al to dissecting the neighbor's cat while it was still alive. These experiments would continue until Al's older brother Mark threatened to expose Mr. Malefic to their father Bernard. Mr. Malefic would disappear for years until the boys went to college. When the boys returned home that summer for a summer break, they would find that their younger brother Richie had become hooked on drugs. And in a drug deal gone wrong, the events of that summer would cause Al to commit his first murder. And when Al finally had human blood on his hands, Mr. Malefic revealed himself to him and said that he had been the one he was waiting for. Deciding to never speak upon that event again, or their memories being wiped, depending on which version of the story is being written at the time, Al would either way become more distant from his brothers. He would transfer colleges and go to a prestigious military academy. He would graduate with honors and then become a commissioned officer in the United States Marine Corps, where he would quickly, and rather absurdly, rise to the rank of lieutenant colonel. Sometime later, he would join the Secret Service, where he would catch the eye of a one Jason Wynn for thwarting an attempt on the president's life, an attempt that was ultimately orchestrated by Jason Wynn. Wynn would then decide to recruit Al into the United States Security Group, where Al would essentially become an assassin for the United States. During this time, he would befriend fellow government agent Terry Fitzgerald, who after some time would implore Al to leave the rough life behind and to take a government desk job. It wouldn't be until Al met the young and beautiful Wanda Blake that he would make some attempt to try to have a normal life for himself. Wanda was everything that Al desired from a woman, but she was not everything that Al desired out of life. Death. Death is what Al truly craved. Al was addicted to murder. Telling himself that these murders and missions were in service to his country were just the lies that he told himself so that he would believe that he was doing a good thing. Al would be sent on various missions to remote places where he would leave piles of corpses in his wake. This would ultimately begin to take a toll on him psychologically, as he was battling with the one thing he felt he was truly good at, against trying to rationalize the reasons for innocent deaths. Questioning the purpose of these missions would begin to create tensions between him and Jason Wynn. Not only that, his marriage with Wanda was also suffering, as she was begging him to leave this life behind and to take a normal job. At some point, Wanda would stop taking her birth control. This was her last attempt to get Al to stay home and to save their marriage. But ultimately, this would be ill-advised. Al would strike Wanda in the stomach, and she would ultimately lose her baby. At that same time, Al would be activated on a mission by Jason Wynn. He had grown weary of Al's incessant questioning and belligerence. He would be shot and killed by fellow assassin Jessica Priest. His body would be set aflame to hide any evidence of his murder, and as he burned to death, his mind could only think of seeing his beloved Wanda one last time. If you're still with me, then you should know by now that Al's death isn't the end of his journey. It's just the beginning. Due to his actions while he was living, Al's soul descended into hell. There he would stand before the ruler of Hell's eighth circle, Malbosia. In the absence of Hell's supreme ruler Satan, Malbosia sits as the realm's second most powerful entity. Confused and distraught, Malbosia plays upon Al's vulnerability. He asks him for his heart's deepest desire. Al only asks to see his wife again. Malbosia only asks for Al's service in return. And it seems that once the deal is struck, Al is returned to Earth. He awakens in a daze. He's confused and with very little memory of who he is, except for his own name. He has vague memories of his time as a Marine and his marriage to a woman whose name he can't remember. But the most perplexing thing is the strange suit that he's donning. Covered in a black costume that seemed alive as it crawled about his skin. White markings on his face and chest seemed to make him appear as more of a hellish-born citizen. Spikes decorating the red accent of his suit. Chains rattling about. A crimson cape lashes out like a wild viper. Al manages to tear the mask from his face, only to find that he's in the same condition that he was in when he was killed. His body severely burned and mangled. He doesn't even recognize himself. He's just a walking corpse. Al's horrors would only increase as he managed to break into a government facility to find old files on himself. He would discover that his sole reason for returning, Wanda, had moved on. Wanda had married Al's best friend Terry, and together they had a child, Cyan. Indeed, Malebolgia had resurrected Al Simmons, but he chose to not send him back to Earth until 7 years after his death. Struck with anger and grief, Al would retreat into the heart of New York City's alleys, known as Rat City. While there, he would begrudgingly become involved with the homeless society there that lived in the alleys, protecting them while still navigating this new life after death. This new life that would see the citizens of Rat City, along with Wanda and her new family, caught in the chaos. In order for Spawn to properly protect those a part of his old life and his new, he would need to combine his abilities as government agent with his new hellish-born powers. It's already understood that Al is a very accomplished Marine and a government assassin. His ability to strategize and think on the fly is uncanny. It's also allowed him to keep his head above water when dealing with supernatural forces. In fact, it's his first instinct to fall back on these abilities whenever he feels pressed, keeping a stock of military-grade weapons throughout the alleys and eventually a permanent safe house. However, this wouldn't be enough, as Al would ultimately need to embrace and tap into his abilities granted to him as a Hellspawn. As stated before, spawns are granted a symbiote. Al's symbiote is actually a demonic parasite that's permanently bonded to a central nervous system. Each symbiote has a name, and Al's symbiote is known as Letha. Letha of the 7th House of K, or commonly known as K7 Letha. Letha is composed entirely of necroplasm, a substance found in hell that allows demonic entities to manifest into the physical realm. In union with K7 Letha, Al is able to manipulate necroplasm in a way that's only limited by his imagination and power reserves. Some of Spawn's more basic abilities include being able to augment his strength in order to be able to lift an entire building, or even the dark god known as Urizen, whose size is considered titanic. While not particularly thought of first for his speed, Spawn is able to move fast enough to where he only appears as a crimson blur. His awareness of reflexes even allow him to keep up with beings who are considered omnipresent. He's capable of shapeshifting and discharging green necroplasts that are both concussive and heat-based. He is shown to use his necroplasm to even manipulate matter and even create inanimate objects. He's also capable of teleportation, flight, invisibility, and illusion casting. Another skill he would manifest is the ability to tap into and feed off of negative energy and emotions in order to reserve his necroplasm. He's also capable of manipulating nocturnal creatures for a variety of means. One such is the use of maggots and insects, creatures who never need sunlight to survive, and he allows them to fester inside of his body in order to maintain his energy reserves. The symbiote is also capable of siphoning and absorbing the DNA of other hellish-based beings, such as vampires. In the beginning, his powers are very limited, as each spawn is only granted a finite amount of energy reserves. Once these reserves are depleted, they are then sent back to Hell in order to await orders for their role in Malebolgia's army. In Al's case, this wouldn't be so simple. Al's symbiote K7 Letha has the ability to evolve. Over the course of Al's many battles, the symbiote would grow in power and change its appearance, eventually making the power limiter that's given to all Hell spawns null and void. It was noted by Spawn's mortal enemy Violator that this is the fastest growing symbiote in Hell's history. In the beginning, his symbiote looked more like a costume, as if he was able to remove parts of it as if it were clothing. After its first evolution, the symbiote appeared more black, sporting more spikes, less red, except for a giant red boot with spikes on it and a giant red gauntlet. The symbiote now honestly takes the shape of whatever Al needs at the present moment, or honestly the artist's interpretation of it at that time in the story. The symbiote really just adapts to the current situation as it's needed. Spawn has also had his abilities augmented from sources outside of Hell as well. At one point, he was even given power over the elements by the Keeper of the Green World. Another ability Spawn had was the summoning of the Legion, a sum total of 6,000 souls that died on the same hour as Al Simmons, and whose souls were sealed within his body. Al would be able to summon these souls in the form of pseudo-Hell spawns in order to fight for him. Spawn's most notable and probably more popular augmentation was taking the fruit of the Tree of Life, a blessing granted upon him by the Mother of Existence. With that power, he was granted the Wings of Redemption. Wings of Redemption Spawn saw him shed his crimson shroud in exchange for shining new wings. This made Al Simmons a divine entity on par with both God and Satan. His powers had grown so powerful that he was now classified as a reality warper. It's important to note that now in the current storyline of Spawn, Al no longer has the Wings of Redemption, Legion, nor the powers of Green World. Throughout his time to Spawn, Al has garnered both divine and demonic enemies. I've gone into so much detail as it is, but I can't cover every single one of his enemies in depth. I'm gonna save those for other videos. But I'll give you guys a quick rundown. You can't talk about any Spawn villain without first mentioning his arch nemesis, Clown. Clown, whose true name is Violator, is a demon who was a lieutenant in Malebolgia's army. He, along with his 4 other siblings known as the Flaviac brothers, were charged with testing newer Hellspawns to see if they were fit for service. He's always seen himself as superior to humans despite being half human himself, and resents the fact that the souls of humans are ultimately the ones chosen to lead Hell's armies. Fun fact, Violator is also the one who oversaw the development and growth of K7 Letha. He would be thwarted and defeated by Spawn on many occasions throughout the years, and on many occasions would enter into alliances with other Spawn enemies. He has since moved on from his role as a lackey for Malebolgia, and has thrown his name into the gauntlet in the war for Hell's throne. I mentioned Malebolgia already in this video as the ruler of Hell's 8th Circle. He would be a great manipulator in many of Al's earlier adventures until he was ultimately killed in issue 100 by Al Simmons. Mammon, or who you all might remember as the Man in White. Mammon would take over as a chief antagonist after the death of Malebolgia. A part of the group of fallen angels known as the Forgotten, Mammon would be the ultimate orchestrator into what caused Al Simmons to become Spawn in the first place. Cogliostro. Cogliostro has a complicated history with Al, to say the least. Cogliostro, or Cog, was introduced as a homeless man in the earlier issues of Spawn. He was an odd citizen of Rat City who seemed to have a lot of knowledge over Al's condition as a Spawn. It would later be revealed that Cog was a Hellspawn himself who broke free of Malebolgia's grasp. He would feign a friendship with Al while scheming to take control of Hell for himself. Sometime later, we would come to learn that Cog is actually Cain. Yes, Cain from the Bible, the son of Adam and Eve, humanity's first murderer. Cain would descend into Hell, where he would become Hell's first Hellspawn. Millennia upon millennia later, he now goes by the moniker of Sin, and he is waging war against the demon lord known as Cataclysm for Hell's control. Naturally, as a product of Hell, Al also has some enemies that reside in Heaven. The most notable and hands down the coolest of any of the enemies from Heaven are the Redeemers. The Redeemers were created as Heaven's anti-Spawn. Just as Spawns contain the souls of humans, Redeemers are taken from the souls of humans as well. They are blessed with a heavenly elemental flame that allows them to go toe-to-toe with the Spawn's necroplasm. Now known as the Forsaken, Abel, the first Redeemer, was cast out by Heaven due to the experimentations driving him insane. In recent times, a Redeemer from the future has come back to the past, or our present, and is an ally of Spawn and a part of the team known as the Scorched. Jason Wynn. Ah, Jason. As I stated before, Jason was Al's former mentor and supervisor at the CIA. He would be haunted by Al repeatedly throughout the years, and at one point, Al used his magic to drive Jason permanently insane. During this time, this allowed Clown, who no longer had a physical body, to possess Jason Wynn. In recent times in the storyline, Jason is now known as the entity Disruptor. He is both physically and emotionally scarred from his encounters with Spawn, and has joined the group known as the Court of Priests. The Court of Priests is a small but diverse group of enemies that Spawn has encountered in his past. They are all scheming to have him accept his role as the King of Hell. In doing so, and have him sit upon the item known as the God Throne. This would see Al removed from their own ambitions. How this exactly works hasn't fully been explained in the books yet, but that's generally their goal. It dawned upon me that during my deep dive with Al Simmons that there's been no greater villain to him than himself. I wanted to try to put into words what this self-antagonizing relationship he has with himself is in my own words.
You open pale green eyes to the filth and mire around you. Rotting food and exposed waste fill your senses. The snoring of New York's displaced citizens who have made these concrete crevices their home is only drowned out by their steps blending in with the sound of your chains. You think of your name, Al. That name has many meanings to many people. Marine, patriot, hero, son, brother, friend, husband, Spawn. Your name is but a hushed whisper, rarely said even by those with the most modest memories of you. The thought of your name makes you wince, and your false tear ducts swell. It hurts more than the bullet and flames that removed Al from this world. But Al was only an idea, a concept. Did Al truly ever live? Al died the moment that strange man in white handed you the scalpel to open up that cat. You were always Spawn, and you didn't even have a choice. No one protected you from this fate. An absent but present father, a corrupt zealot of a mother, cowards for brothers. When you killed that man, you said you did it for your brother. But you and I know you wanted to experience it. It being the most intimate of moments where you stand on the shores of life and death, and you watch as your victim has pulled away from the shores of life by death's current. You never felt more alive than when you forced that unholy macabre upon your victims. It's what made you perfect to them. It's what made you horrible to her. Wanda. The biggest lie that you continue to tell yourself. Send me back, you cried to Malebolgia. Let me see my wife again, and I will lead your armies. Wanda helped you hide what you always were, what you always had been. Spawn. Wanda could have saved you. She tried to save you. But saving you isn't what you wanted. That's why you did it. That's why you killed your child with her. You couldn't allow anyone to tame you. Wanda isn't what you wanted. No, Al, you didn't want her. You had another lover. Murder. You would do anything to experience it. Being a patriot only made you feel better about it. But this feeling you experience now, it's familiar, isn't it? It's nothing. You're in this world now as a shell, a specter, a reanimation of your singed corpse not even filled with living organs. It's become a home for things that crawl and slither in the shadows. You're a house for bugs, maggots, and worms. You look outward from this cold prison of mold, refuse, and concrete, and you want to lash out. Jason, Terry, Malebolgia, even Mammon, they all played a role in your anger, but they never made you commit the acts that landed you here. You crave to tear this hellish symbiote off, but in the end, it's all that holds you and caresses your decayed flesh. It's the closest you will ever have to a loving embrace again, because Wanda is no more. All you are is Spawn. All you have is fire, darkness, and murder. And this is all Al Simmons ever wanted.